Okay, so what's the most commonly used psychoactive drug on the planet? Caffeine. Being a single mom, working multiple jobs, and now going back to school, I depend on caffeine to get through the day, and a lot of it. My heavy use and interest in my health has led me to worry and ultimately want to be educated on how exactly caffeine works in the body. So, caffeine works by affecting chemicals in the brain. Today we'll talk about 3 main points. We'll talk about adenosine, and then we'll talk about adrenaline, and lastly dopamine. So let's begin with adenosine. Adenosine is a chemical found in the brain. According to Dubach, this chemical bonds with specific receptors. So when the adenosine bonds with the adenosine receptors, a reaction occurs that slows down brain activity. When your brain activity slows down, that's what causes people to get drowsy. So when you take some type of caffeine, the caffeine to the brain looks like the adenosine, so it allows it to bond with those receptors, essentially blocking the adenosine from actually getting to those receptors. And unlike adenosine, the caffeine does the complete opposite. So when it bonds to the receptors, instead of slowing down the brain activity goes crazy, like totally increases. And so that brings us, now that we've talked about adenosine, we're going to talk about adrenaline. Adrenaline is another chemical found in the brain. This chemical is released by the pituitary gland. So when the caffeine bonds with the receptors, making the brain activity go crazy, that signals the pituitary gland to be like, whoa, what's all this activity doing? And it sends out adrenaline because it thinks an emergency is going on. And adrenaline is its way of fixing that emergency. So the gland's response is, adrenaline is the chemical that gives people that fight or flight response. So the way adrenaline fixes the problem is it makes your body more alert, it tenses up your muscles, and it gets you ready to fight or run. So even though that can make you more alert, it also, like I've experienced a lot of times because I use a lot of caffeine, it gives you that jitteriness feeling. Alright, so now that we've talked about adenosine and adrenaline, let's talk about dopamine. Dopamine is the last brain chemical we'll discuss. As Brian, Charles, and Cunningham have stated in their article, How Caffeine Works, dopamine activates the brain's pleasure center. So caffeine slows down the brain's ability to reabsorb dopamine. This in turn raises your dopamine levels. And I don't know if a lot of you know, but that's what causes the feel-good emotions that people get. So just like cocaine or heroin, caffeine raises those dopamine levels. That's just what I said. Okay, so dopamine is also the reason why some people think caffeine is addictive. Whenever you use a caffeine, your brain gets those happy, feel-good feelings, and then when you are withdrawing from the cocaine, or it's no longer in your caffeine, when it's no longer in your system, your body or your brain craves it, making you want more and more caffeine. Addiction occurs when the brain starts craving the pleasures created and increased dopamine levels. So, to close, caffeine works by affecting chemicals in your brain. We've talked about 3 points. We mentioned adenosine, we talked about adrenaline, and then we talked about dopamine. So, not all drugs are bad, especially in moderation, and that's great news considering how many of us depend on caffeine throughout the day.